Welcome to the CEC Report. It's 28th of March. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined again by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, the CEC has the answer to Joe Hockey's question, Glass-Steagall. This is a bailout, hand over your deposits. And finally, the 30th anniversary of the best plan to avoid nuclear war. First, the CEC has the answer to Joe Hockey's question, Glass-Steagall. Craig, we're in a very interesting point in the Australian economic debate because, and undoubtedly thanks to us putting the spotlight on it, there's a lot of attention on the state of the banks, a lot. And we have a likely future treasurer, Joe Hockey, who perhaps because of electioneering, where he wants to be seen to be a little bit different to the line from the government that all is fine, all is sound, don't worry.
Well, Robbie, just before this program, I heard Joe Hockey on the radio live saying that in 2008 our banks were in trouble, and it was only for the government's extension of the AAA credit rating that they were actually able to be saved. That's
very important because you very seldom hear an acknowledgement of that in a sort of like a popular forum.
Yeah. Economists
talk about it among closed doors, etc. The public's not supposed to have that impression. We've been screaming about it, so Hockey's echoing that.
He knows what he's inheriting, potentially as an ex-treasurer, and also he was talking about Australia's huge debt problem, which has been exacerbated by the government's race to borrow monies overseas and competition, all sorts of stuff like that. But the point is that he has acknowledged what we've actually said on this program many times about the nature of the financial crisis, and that Australian banks are not as safe and sound as people make them out to be.
Now, Craig, the other possible reason he's doing this is because he has a lot to make up for in terms of credibility, which we'll demonstrate in a minute. But specifically what I want to focus on is he is calling for an inquiry into the nature of Australia's financial banking system, specifically the fact that we have this dominance of 4 big banks, and they have an implicit taxpayer guarantee which makes them even more dominant, and what should be done about that.
What do you mean they're too big to fail?
Too big to fail.
And therefore the government's got to step in and lend them credit ratings and so forth.
Exactly, and well, since they've done it once, now that they've effectively discontinued that, or actually discontinued that, everyone knows though that if they get into trouble again, they do it again. So that becomes an implicit guarantee.
But it's going to get worse each time, so the question is how far the hands go into our pockets.
Yes. So Hockey wants an inquiry into this. Well, Joe, you're watching, Joe? We're here. We're over here, and we've got the answer. We've been harping on about nothing but for 3 years. It's called Glass-Steagall. As our petition states, Craig, if people can get on our website and look at our petition, or if you've already seen it, Glass-Steagall in Australia would break up the big 4 banks, break them up so that the guarantee on deposits would not extend to all the other things they do. It wouldn't extend to their derivatives bets and all the other investment banking trading that they do. Now, as a consequence of that, if you've got the 4 big banks broken up and you have smaller banks that hold the deposits, but even though they're smaller, they're stronger because they're just focused on that business, and that's the part the government supports, then the other specialist financial institutions that are not there to gamble, such as credit unions and building societies, etc., they would be able to compete with the banks more easily, right? That would instantly create more competition, which is one of the big concerns here. And so this is like, but dare I say it, the perfect solution. Now, Joe better listen this time, Craig, because he doesn't have a good track record. Unfortunately, his credibility is about, well, let's say it might have gone the way of his weight loss. Or he might be trying to get it back. Let's see. It might be an inverse proportion to his size. Sorry, Joe. August 21st, 2007, we have a letter from Joe, and we'll put the text on the screen. Joe wrote to a constituent who had written to him with information from the CEC. So this is 2007, and the letter from the constituent warned Joe Hockey about Lyndon LaRouche and the CEC's warning that the financial crash had started, because LaRouche famously said in July 25th, 2007, The financial crash has started. There's no possibility of stopping this. This is it, right? And that was the Bear Stearns had just gone under, and it was the beginning of what eventually erupted. So this is Hockey's reply on the 21st of August. He wrote, quote, "Thank you for your letter of 12 August 2007 concerning the global financial system. I have noted your views. I, however, disagree vehemently with your analysis that the world is facing a collapse of the financial markets. The last few days have indicated that the financial markets, with the support of central banking institutions, are able to meet the demands that have been placed upon them." End quote. And Craig, a year later, the financial markets collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. That's his credibility. That just proves what I said. He needs to listen to us. What he's saying now, though, is part of this larger debate that I've alluded to. Another aspect of it is the governor of the Reserve Bank has taken a contrary view. He's come out this week, on Tuesday actually. He's arguing against more inquiries, and he's actually arguing against more bank reform. And he's trying to say any reform is actually too onerous on the banking system, which is an admission itself, really. He's also trying to downplay the fact that the RBA is building up this $380 billion bailout fund. So this is sort of like the state of the debate at the moment. Here's a question for you to comment on. A lot of people, when we raised this Glass-Steagall, because Glass-Steagall was a US act of Congress, right, which was in place in America for 66 years. A lot of people instantly say, hang on, our banks are sound, we've got a strong financial system, Glass-Steagall is not relevant here. If it's not relevant here, Craig, why are all these important people in Australia having this discussion?
Well, there's the paradox you've just elaborated. Of course, the banks aren't sound. Look, we talk about this all the time. Look at the derivatives holding of the banks, Robbie. Look at the latest derivatives holdings. And what's even more
We've got a new graph to put up on the screen which will show this.
Well, the point is that the Commonwealth Bank, right, for many years up until this last year, exposed its total notional holdings of derivatives. This year it hit them. Why is it doing that? Look at the rate of growth of the Commonwealth Bank's derivatives over the last 10 years in particular, and you'll see it's been faster than any other bank. Why are they so hooked on these derivatives? Well, it's quite well known that derivatives are actually used to hide real losses. Yep. That's what they're there for. So when you start to see this huge amount of derivatives in our banking system, you say, okay, what's really going on here? Why are these things off balance sheet? There should be nothing off balance sheet if you actually got a sound banking system. So the point though, Robbie, is that just like gamblers, you know, people that are hooked on either pokies or going to the casino, you've got to unhook people from the idea that the banking system is nothing more than a speculative system. It's not. A banking system is made up of banks that you need to control the flow of money, right? Money, literal physical money and so forth. And credit. But the credit is actually governed by a national bank, not the private banking system. So that you have a banking system that's highly regulated, right? So that people do know their savings are guaranteed and safe. That there is the opportunity to get mortgages. There is loans that are loaned out for productive purposes, you know, industry and so forth. And this is all governed by a national bank whose specific purpose is the idea of stimulating the physical economy. And you're talking about Glass-Steagall in 1933. Well, that also gloved in with another organisation that Roosevelt developed called the Rural Finance Corporation. Initially, it was started by Herbert Hoover as a movement, as a mechanism to bail out the banks. And all the Rural Finance Corporation could do with the government's backing was to loan to banks to try and prop them up. But of course, that wasn't good enough, because as soon as the banks got the loans from the Rural Finance Corporation, they sat on them. Yep. Because they were trying to protect their own positions.
And most of those rural banks went bankrupt anyway.
Yeah, well, there's 14,000 were in trouble, and about 5,000 went bankrupt. And I think overall, after Roosevelt came in, Robbie, he reorganised the Rural Finance Corporation, and he allowed the Rural Finance Corporation to lend not just to the banks, but to industry directly, to public authorities. And what he did is he transformed the economy by literally putting credit in order to take the idle unemployed and the idled resources and put them to work.
So what you're saying there actually is that we should think of the banking system the way Ben Chifley explicitly said we should in the 1936 Royal Commission on Banking, like a utility, like your electricity supply, like your water supply. It's the banking system we should think of it in terms of functioning like that. So that it has a physical basis.
When things dry out, then you supply the water, right? Like a garden, right? That's what Ben Chifley's biggest complaint in his dissenting report on the 1930s Banking Commission that he was part of, I think 1936 I think it was that in times of economic distress, you have to have a banking system that can literally create the credit necessary to put into the system. Now, of course, we know from the Great Depression years, the banks actually contracted credit, right? And he said that's the role of a national bank. That's the role. It should have been the role of the Commonwealth Bank, but that was actually blocked by Sir Robert Gibson in those years. So what you have is, and this was a sticking point for Chifley with the banking system, and why in the late 40s he actually moved to nationalise the banks, because he saw an absolute necessity that for a sovereign country to have a sound economy, you have to have a banking system that acts in the interest of the general welfare and the development of the productive nature of the economy.
Well, to be clear, Craig, he moved to the way the banking system worked in World War II. It wasn't nationalised, but the National Bank, the Commonwealth Bank, was in charge. And he moved to make sure that was permanent after the war, that it had this functionality where it was tightly regulated. And it's because that was resisted by the private banking system, who wanted to say, the government should have no say over the banking system at all. That's what forced Chifley's hand to move to nationalise.
And that's what exactly we've got Joe Hockey on the screen saying, government has no right in the banking system whatsoever. Well, look where it's got us, Joe. It's the whole system is crashing because sovereign governments that act in the interest of their people are not involved in directing the credit for the nation.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Craig. Let's end that here. When we come back, we're going to talk about an update on Cyprus. Welcome back to the CEC Report. This is a bailout. Hand over your deposits. As of now, Craig, the upshot from Syria, we discussed Syria last week. Sorry, not Syria, Cyprus. As of now, the upshot from Cyprus is that the initial plan was rejected, which would have been a tax on all deposits. However, the final solution is almost just as bad. Now, let me explain. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, gave a guarantee last year when the Eurozone crisis was really high. She said all deposits in all banks in Europe up to €100,000 are protected, right? So in the case of Cyprus, when they said we're going to tax deposits under €100,000 to the tune of 6.75%, that blew that out of the water. So the Cyprus Parliament said, no, we've got to stick with that. So, okay, they've stuck with that. The problem is there's a lot of deposits above €100,000. And they're not just taxing the original proposal. They have agreed, the Cyprus Parliament has agreed that in some of these banks in Cyprus, they will tax that amount above €100,000 up to 40%. Now, this destroys any general credibility in banks Europe-wide, if this is allowed to happen. To prove it is Europe-wide,
they'll be all watching to see, are we next?
Well, and there are people in Spain who also this week experienced that. One of Spain's biggest banks collapsed. Depositors, again above the €100,000 threshold, were forced to bear the losses of that collapse, right?
Any thinking person, Robbie, in Europe right now will be saying, if I've got €500,000 in this account, I'm getting the hell out of this currency, not just the euro, I'm getting out.
And if they're not that sharp, then they should listen to the chairman, the Dutch chairman, and I won't bother pronouncing his name, of the Eurozone, who said, and caused a shock, he said Cyprus would be a template for the future of what we do, right? Now, in order to make this thing in Cyprus stick though, they have, it's now Thursday the 28th, they've kept the banks shut until today. Now, I just heard this morning that banks they're going to let them start opening as of today, but they've been shut effectively 2 weeks, right? They extended the closure for a long time. Banks in Cyprus banks here in Australia will be allowed to open today, but the limits on withdrawals are enormous, right? They're determined to stop a bank run, but it's like King Canute holding back the tide. Ultimately, they won't be able to. There's another element here. In Cyprus, the majority of the deposits are from Russians, right? And there's a geopolitical element, Craig, where the Russians are feeling they're being targeted by these massive taxes on their deposits. They're being made to pay and they see it as an attack on them, which geopolitically is not a very good time for that to be happening, given the strategic tensions between Russia and Europe. What I wanted you to comment on, we discussed this last week, and you raised the question of fascism. That what we're seeing with the Troika dictating these bailouts, the bailouts have come hand in hand with fascism in the form of fascist austerity, etc. Now, by the laws of the free market, people would be forgiven for thinking that the financial authorities want to hold the market up as sacrosanct, right? And therefore, this arrangement makes no sense, because by going after deposits, they're destroying any confidence in the system of banking. But what they're actually doing here is not actually trying to save the Cyprus banks, they're trying to save the euro. The whole point of this is they want to have this, they want to preserve this system where a whole bunch of European countries have signed onto one currency which allows them to be dictated to. In other words, what they're preserving is their power. And doesn't this show the true ugly face of the financial oligarchy here, that it will steal from anybody and kill anybody to prop up its financial power?
What you said before, Robbie, about free trade, right? Well, who is the mother of free trade? It's the British Empire. Now, we talk about on the show the British Empire as, and people say, oh, it doesn't exist anymore. It went out of existence. What a load of rubbish. It's a financial monetarist empire. Its tools are globalisation, free trade, and the stealing of public assets through privatisation.
The British describe themselves as an informal financial empire.
The flip side of that, Robbie, of this policy is environmentalism. And you've had the call for the population of the world to be reduced to below 1 billion people. Well, what a better way to do it. Get rid of the money supply, get rid of people's savings, take away the means to which to support the populations, take away the means. In the case of Cyprus, you only have to look, how does a business supposed to run when it can't write checks or can't pay its bills, right? Well, the intention here, Robbie, as insidious as it might sound, and so completely irrational from any thinking person's point of view, the intention is population reduction, right? That's what we've said many, many times, in our publications, that you have a ruling financial oligarchy, only a few thousand entities that see themselves basically like Zeus, that have the right to determine who lives and who dies. Look at Syria for the moment, right? Why is that taking place? Well, this is a geopolitical policy of right to protect. It's an oligarchical policy. They don't care about who they're killing. The intention is to destroy national sovereignty. National sovereignty, of course, comes with this idea that you have to protect people.
Because national sovereignty gives governments power over their people instead of this private financial oligarchy.
And look, when the Eurozone was established, Maastricht was established, the intention was not to develop the economies and to support the people. It was to destroy the national sovereignty of a multitude of countries so that you could impose an effective dictatorship, a fascist dictatorship, as you see with the austerity in Greece, over every single country. Now, there's been resistance to that, but that resistance usually gets flushed away when people start getting very, very hungry. They can't do anything, right? So this is where it requires a completely different approach, which is what we represent. The idea of Glass-Steagall internationally, large-scale infrastructure development projects within sovereign countries, and going back to the principles of national sovereignty, which means dumping the euro, going back to national currencies, goes back to the idea of national banking, and that's what actually has to be done here in Cyprus. I mean, there's plenty of solutions for the people in Cyprus, but they're not going to be within the current model.
All right, thanks, Craig. When we come back, we're going to talk about the 30th anniversary of the best plan to avoid nuclear war. Welcome back to the CEC Report. The 30th anniversary of the best plan to avoid nuclear war. Saturday was the 23rd of March, and that was the 30th anniversary, Craig, of a truly historic television broadcast in the United States by then President Ronald Reagan. And why it was historic is it wasn't your normal run-of-the-mill presidential broadcast. He announced a revolutionary idea which became known as the Strategic Defense Initiative. And it was his plan to offer the Soviet Union a joint project that they could develop together to avoid the possibility of nuclear war. So Craig, just give the viewers a sense of this SDI concept.
Yeah, Robbie, I think it's really important to say that Ronald Reagan hated the idea of this nuclear détente, where you had this idea of mutual destruction, MAD, mutually assured destruction, which was the policy of...
face off at 20 paces and hoping the other one doesn't pull the trigger.
Right. So what Mr. LaRouche has been working on this for decades, 30 years, 20 years before Ronald Reagan made this announcement, but the intention, LaRouche's intention was to go with a crash scientific program to develop new physical principles, things like beam weapons, which were already being developed at that time, to stop ballistic weapons in their tracks, to be able to make them unable to contact each other's content. So using a crash scientific program to develop the principles which were shared among nations so that you eliminated the threat of nuclear weapons. That was an absolute terrifying policy prospect for the oligarchy.
Yeah, so instead of what they called the START treaties, where both sides oversaw the other side decommissioning nuclear weapons, LaRouche's idea was if we work together on technology that we both share, we both have, that we can shoot down your weapons and you can shoot down ours, right? And we've developed that together, then you don't have to do that. You both know that you're both capable of rendering the threat redundant.
Why would you be even bothering building the weapons knowing that as soon as you put them up, they're shot down? But the other benefit, Robbie,
it had to be shared.
It had to be shared because, look, the benefits from the development of this technology had major benefits for the civilian economy as well. And Russia at that particular point needed to develop its civilian economy, and that's what LaRouche had in mind at that particular time.
So what happened was in 1976, LaRouche had run for president for the first time, and he campaigned on this idea. In 1980, or in 1979, Craig, he, as part of his political activism, he entered into back-channel discussions with people in the Soviet embassy, and he kept the US government appraised of those discussions, and the US government was happy to use him as a back channel. In 1980, LaRouche met Reagan when LaRouche ran for president the second time as a Democrat. He met Reagan as a Republican in a debate, and they got on quite well, and he told Reagan his idea. And when Reagan won the election, LaRouche was invited to come and share the idea with the White House. Not everyone in the White House was keen on it at all.
Oh, no way.
A lot of people were very opposed, like people like Henry Kissinger and James Baker III. But Reagan loved it. He loved the idea that there could be a solution to this thing that had defined the Cold War for 40 years. And so he announced it. Now here's the key part. LaRouche said it had to be shared. He said to the back channel negotiation he had with the Soviets, you've got to accept this offer. If you don't, your economy, if it doesn't have this benefit, will collapse within 5 years. Tragically, the Russians rejected the offer. Their economy collapsed within 6 years of Reagan's announcement, Craig. So the basis of LaRouche's concept was that peace is achieved through economic development. And today, isn't that just as an important a lesson?
Even more so, Robbie, because not only do we have the threat of nuclear war today, which is really, we look at the north of us with Japan and China and these tensions that we've written a lot about in our last New Citizen.
And the Syrian rebels have just demanded missiles in Syria which will be effectively targeting Russia.
The other thing that we talk a lot about is the need for a strategic defence against Earth, which is what the Russians are now talking about, of a need to be able to protect ourselves from asteroids and asteroid strikes, which we've seen recently have been absolutely devastating, and they're only small ones.
Yeah.
So we need a crash program of new physical principles, not only to make nuclear weapons obsolete, but to make any threat of extraterrestrial asteroids and so forth hitting us less of a threat.
And the technology that we'd have to develop for this is immensely beneficial to our physical economy.
That's the whole point, is that these principles flow down and through the entire economy.
All right, well, Craig, we've run out of time. Again, we have to leave this discussion here. Thanks for tuning into this week's CEC Report. Tune in next week for more of the CEC Report.